to the fourth and final session of our college webinar series. We are so excited to have you here. Today, we're going to learn about a new academic partnership model designed to increase student enrollment at 2- and 4-year institutions and into the workforce. My name is Jennifer Kolb, and I'm the Vice President of Business Development at Tallo. And joining me is Rafael Castaneda, Vice President of Workforce Development at MedCerts. MedCerts is a national online training provider strengthening the workforce through innovative e-learning solutions. Focused on certifications in high-demand areas of allied healthcare and IT, MedCerts serves individuals from all backgrounds, including the military and their families, career changers, and under and unemployed. With that, on this Veterans Day, we want to take a second to recognize our military and our veterans and thank you for your service. Now, our goal today is to have a conversation. We've got 20 minutes, and I have no doubt it will fly by quickly. We encourage you to use the Q&A box so Rafael can answer your questions live. We want to make this a valuable and impactful conversation to help you with your own strategizing and planning. So joining us from the West Coast, I want to start by welcoming Rafael to the conversation. Before joining MedCerts, Rafael was the Chief Academic Officer and Dean of Education at CBD College, a private 2-year allied health college in Los Angeles. Rafael also served as the Strategy and Innovation Leader for Jobs for the Future, JFF, crafting connections between post-secondary actors and thought leaders. He's also served as Director of Strategic Partnerships at Ed2Go, a subsidiary of Cengage Learning that focuses on non-credit, industry-recognized credential programs. And earlier in his career, Rafael served as Director of Academic Operations at the Katz School of Graduate and Professional Studies at Yeshiva University, as a Managing Director of Online Operations for the University of Cincinnati's UC Online program. So, with that kind of resume, what an honor it is to have you here with us today, Rafael. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So let's just dive right in. I think we probably got a lot of attendees who aren't familiar with the new program that MedCerts is working on. So if you could just kick things off with that 30,000-foot view and tell us a little bit about the program.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the primary focus is to amplify and execute on what we would call like a K through job strategy. And I think the difference there is that instead of viewing the learner journey from kindergarten to the workforce as a sequential or segmented process, we would encourage folks to think about that as a learner journey that has stages to it, but they have connectivities to it as well. So, our partnership with Tallo allows us to think about how do students coming from the K-12 environment want to position themselves for the next step, that next segment. And as we've seen in the post-secondary landscape, there are challenges with enrollment in traditional colleges and universities, and we're seeing those populations contract. And so we believe that positioning a certification type program, which has a significantly lower price point, but also has a certification from a credentialing authority, allows that learner to have education that's meaningful, enter the workforce at an employer partner of ours or, kind of on their own, but still utilize that certification for potential entry through a prior learning assessment process into one of our academic partners through articulated credit. So if you can imagine a student coming out of the high school space, having gone through and saying, I'm interested in healthcare or IT, taking a 6-month certification, becoming a medical assistant, certified medical assistant, going and getting a job as an MA at an employer who has a tuition assistance policy, and then taking that certification to an academic institution and getting articulated credit for it, they could work full time while pursuing a higher level degree, and hopefully have that employer's tuition assistance policy offset or pay for the cost of that continuing degree as they go forward. So the benefit to the student, I think, is obvious. The benefit to the academic institution in particular is a feeder population of students who have gone through an online program and are interested in continuing their academic journey into their degrees. And then the benefit to the employer is a qualified frontline talent acquisition opportunity, but then also increase levels of opportunity for that employee to grow within the organization and thereby drive down their learning and development or talent acquisition costs. So we feel that those three legs of the stool are really going to be a meaningful and impactful strategy for not just MedCerts, but also for learners, academic institutions, and employers on a go-forward basis. So it really is that K through job strategy sequence that we'd like to amplify here.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And everybody wins in that, right? You just went through the value props like that for the students, for the higher ed institutions, for the employers. It seems like that pathway is a no-brainer. What certifications or what programs can students do this for?
Well, it really is a designed initially when you think about MedCerts, right? It's a medical certification, but it's really, think about the allied health field. So we work with a lot of hospital systems, three in particular that I'm thinking of that we have formal relationships with, who have challenges in a talent acquisition perspective for kind of that frontline employee who has certification, as I mentioned, like medical assisting, phlebotomy, EKG tech, pharmacy tech, people who are very much absolutely in demand for the workforce, specifically in healthcare and also in IT. And the employers are looking for those folks to come in and fill those jobs and then grow with the organization. So if you think about it from an allied health perspective, I think that the pandemic exacerbated the need for frontline responders in the healthcare space who have specific skills and competencies because they've passed a certification exam and hold that certification credential to be able to go in and actually work with the public, service the healthcare patients and customers, and they can do it in just about any discipline inside of the allied health field. That's that frontline employee opportunity. We also feel that just right beneath nurses and doctors, if you will, are maybe a little bit of an enhanced level of staff members. So think surgical technologists, sterile processing techs, and clinical certified medical assistants. So people who actually have a little bit more experience, either in time and or skill set, and see ever increasing opportunities to progress their career. So allied health is a great industry to be in. The healthcare field is growing. It's projected to continue to grow pretty robustly. And while I would never guarantee a recession-proof type of job, we definitely do see a strong appetite for these types of careers. And we're seeing employers be very, very intentional about how they're going about recruiting these folks. And hopefully MedCerts can continue to play a big part in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this pandemic has just emphasized how important this industry is for all of us these past couple of years here. So we talked a little bit, this model could be applicable for a 2-year or a 4-year institution. Are there any big differences between the two?
I think so. I think that, if you're thinking about like the community college or 2-year space initially, for the most part, they're going to have similar programs. So, how MedCerts would want to partner with this institution is to offer the programs through like a turnkey solution to the community, right? Most colleges don't necessarily have a huge budget to go do new program developments just sitting around. So we would want to partner with that institution to offer those communities in their sphere of influence, if you will, robust programs in partnership with MedCerts, but underneath the school's brand. And I think why that's important is because it gives the 2-year school or that community college the opportunity to really service their communities and fill in-demand occupations. And when you think about their strategic initiatives and their mandates, this is really the reason why they exist, is to service their communities and provide people into the workforce in a more time frame friendly environment than you would say if you were pursuing a larger degree or a higher level degree. So I think the opportunity is there for the 2-year schools to offer portfolios like this without tremendous out-of-pocket costs, but also at the same time be able to think about how do we keep these students involved in their academic journey. And that's where the articulation component comes into play. And what MedCerts is very intentional about is looking at the workforce surrounding these schools to ensure that we're providing the in-demand occupation careers, of course, because obviously you wouldn't want to offer something that doesn't resonate with the workforce locally. But at the same time, you don't want to cannibalize what the current program offerings the school has. So having that flexibility to say, hey, these programs work and they supplement, as opposed to compete with or cannibalize from. I think that's where a two-year school could really benefit from a partnership with MedCerts or another training provider, certainly. But we want to be very intentional about how to partner with and supplement and drive more students into higher levels of their academic journey into the degree programs, because I think that's a really important step for them to take as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned driving enrollment to your four-year institution, driving enrollment. So for everyone on the call, Tallo and MedCerts work closely together to funnel students into the MedCerts program. So if the school is using the program, do the students have to already be enrolled at MedCerts, or are they enrolled at the higher ed institution, or how does that work?
So we actually have a formalized articulation agreement with Excelsior College currently, where they have provided a MedCerts graduate. And when we define graduate, we would define somebody who's completed the didactic academic portion of the training, and then actually received a certification by taking and passing that certification exam. Excelsior College and others that we're talking to will actually articulate up to 9 credit hours for that student, that graduate, into their select associate's degrees, like associates in health sciences. So generally what we would obviously want to have happen is a student to go through the MedCerts training, become certified, go to the workforce, certainly if that's the right thing for them, fill those in-demand jobs. But at the same time, don't think of MedCerts as like the last step, right? So I have a certification. Awesome, great. What's next? How do you continue to grow not only your education, but your academic journey? Because I think degrees will always be relevant. We just need to think about how to maybe put like a step between the K through 12 segment and then whether or not a student wants to continue their journey into a larger credential, like an associate's or bachelor's degree. So the student really does need to go through that training. They need to become certified. These are all required elements. But once they do that, if you do the math, right, because it's about ROI for students these days, if you do the math at the cost per credit hour for those 9 credits, assuming that all of those would transfer, that's about $5,000 to the student in value. Mm-hmm. That's actually more than the cost of the MedCerts certification. So if you think about it, the investment in themselves on a go-forward basis is actually growing over time, because the MedCert certification says 4,000, the value of that transfer is right around 5 into Excelsior. That for me is a value added component that any learner should consider if they're thinking about entering the allied health field and want to continue their educational journey into a degree.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. So you mentioned $5,000 in value. I think we got a question that came in of how long does it take to complete that certification? So I imagine it's a little different, but yeah, I saw that question come in. So
it depends. So they are designed to be asynchronous, self-paced. So we would say that if you looked at the time on task, it could take anywhere between 4 to 6 months to complete. But we do give students the opportunity to access the content in the LMS for up to 12 months, because we know that students' lives don't stop when they go to school, right? It's like adding a full-time job to an already very full plate. And so we want to make sure that they have access to that content and kind of go at their own pace, but certainly we do want to make sure that they're completing in a timely fashion and what we would consider on time. So it's designed to be 4 to 6 months, but we do give them access for longer. And then just another thing that I would mention is we're thinking about the learner in a very specific way. So we've recently launched cohort learning. So as students go through those 4 to 6 months, they have the opportunity to also go into pods or actual peer learning groups, where we know that the social aspects of learning are very important to success, to completion, to graduation, and positive student outcomes, not just from an academic perspective, but from an emotional, social perspective as well, a psychological perspective, that if you have a group of people around you, you're more likely to be successful. And this came out of a study that we're doing at Stanford University. So we're really, really excited to see how this goes through. And I don't think there's really a lot of those opportunities for peer learning at a certification level. Certainly there is for higher levels of education, but at a certification level, introducing the social pod component, we think is going to be a real game changer for students. So we're hoping that drives, we're actually planning that drives a lot of great student retention outcomes.
Yeah, that's incredible. I feel like, Rafael, you and I, we're talking all the time, and that's a new one I haven't heard about. So that sounds really cool. We got a question that came in about it specifically from Pat Lee. What does peer learning look like within those pods?
Yeah, so peer learning, I think, is a term that can be used subjectively, right? Like what exactly does that mean? I remember when I was in school, I was assigned to a work group, and that work group did most everything but work, right? So that was my experience. Well, what we want to have is we want to have students be able to interface with each other virtually. And we do that through a technology called Big Blue Button. And what that allows students to do is have regularly scheduled times with people in their pod. We're focusing right around 6. Obviously, if you had 400 people in the pod, the whole point would be missed. So we want them to be intimate but effective. So you're going to have students be able to interface with their peers on a weekly basis or as needed, ad hoc. But we really want to encourage that weekly interface because we feel like that gives students the opportunity to kind of think about what they want to talk about, how they want to engage, and really give them the opportunity to do that in a virtual way. So it is, intentional towards their academic journey and what they're currently studying. But we also want to give them the opportunity to meet other people in their program, draw those connections. I think we all have lifelong connections that we made in college. And while this is a very different definition of college than maybe perhaps what I or you went through, I do believe that students are going to connect with one another. And you never know who down the road in a professional setting could give you an opportunity or vice versa. So not only are we thinking about the students' well-being outside of the academic, in addition to the academic, but also like how these connections can benefit them throughout the rest of the course of their professional life.
Yeah. And what great networking. That's really neat to hear about. Okay. So we are almost at time. I knew the 20 minutes was going to fly by. I feel like this is a commercial. We go through it so quickly. Is there anything else, Rafael? I think we've gone through some really impactful value propositions for the students, for the higher ed institutions, even for the workforce. Are there any other kind of value adds before I ask the question of, how do you get started? But anything else that we haven't covered that you'd want to share about the benefit of doing this kind of partnership?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it kind of goes along with that question that I'm seeing pop up right here is currently working with any 2-year schools. So we are, as I mentioned, working with Excelsior College closely, a formal agreement. And that's just the first of many conversations that we're having because we feel that this is really, it speaks to the landscape in post-secondary of today, right? We know that learners are really looking at this from a very educated perspective. I read an article the other day that shows that most high schoolers or a larger percentage of high schoolers aren't even considering college at this point. So if I'm looking at that as a 2 or 4 year institution of higher learning, I might be a little worried. And I might wonder, where are my populations for degrees coming from? And so a partnership with a MedCerts can really amplify not only the opportunity to provide additional programs to communities that are served, but also be very relevant to the workforce, trying to keep pace with that workforce. Partnering with MedCerts gives you the opportunity to position your school in front of those learners who are maybe not considering pursuing a degree right outside of high school. And for those adult populations, 37 million roughly that have credit but no degree, they're considering, okay, well, do I want to go finish that? Or do I want to maybe get some skills and upskill at a price point that's not going to put me in debt, right? As we approach 2 trillion in student debt at this point. I think this is a really good opportunity to look at the landscape and say, this partnership could not only amplify our portfolio of offerings to our communities that are relevant, but it's also an opportunity to feed our degree programs with students who have been successful in this type of learning in the past. So that's where those types of populations can come from, not in totality, but maybe as supplement to other strategies. And then the last thing I would say is working with MedCerts is a value add because we have the employer partner in the healthcare space on the back end, which is really what this is all about, getting people gainful employment jobs. So if a student can go and get a certification in partnership with the school, feed into their degree programs through articulated credit, and then at the same time be working and then help that or to take that in the employer's tuition assistance policy and use it to offset the cost of their future degree or the degree that they're currently in. That for me is a way for an academic institution to really bolster its strategy moving forward as we see these shifts in the post-secondary landscape continue. And think that it's a really good timing. And so for those schools that are very interested in this, they're being very intentional about it. And we would obviously want to be open to having those conversations for anybody that would like to.
Yeah. Yeah, there is no doubt that in the wake of what we've seen over the past couple of years with the pandemic, the landscape of recruiting, enrollment, it has absolutely changed. So we're so excited to be working with MedCerts and partnering with you for this incredible program. I think it has the power to change a lot of lives. And so we're ready to tackle it with you. So I know we are out of time. We're going to put Rafael's contact information up on the screen. Rafael, thank you so much for joining us. I think this was a really valuable conversation. So if you have any questions, please, you can reach out to me, reach out to Rafael. If you would like to learn more or have conversations, we'd love to do that with you. So thank you again. There's also a link on the screen if you have any upcoming enrollment and recruiting needs. We are hosting a few college fairs throughout the rest of the fall, so we'd love to have you there. So thanks so much, everyone. Have a great week.